Do you know how these hats made news this week? Do you know if this is the horse that won the Kentucky Derby? Do you know how this unusual sketch was involved in the news? You're invited to check your news knowledge against a quartet of celebrities as Columbia presents It's News to Me. Our panel tonight, Quincy Howe, journalism professor at the University of Illinois. Anna Lee, star of stage, screen, and television. Jean Dalrymple, famous Broadway producer and concert manager. John Henry Falk, raconteur and humorist. And your host of It's News to Me, John Daly.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, and we hope that It's News to Me will be both interesting and informative. This quartet of distinguished personalities here at my left are going to tackle news problems in friendly competition with selected members of our studio audience. So let's have the first representative of John Q. Public. Will you come over here and sit down next to me, please? If I may digress for just a moment, I must say this is a splendid way to begin a new television program. This is Shirley Higgins.
Yes.
And where do you live, Mrs. Higgins?
Well, we live in Hempstead right now. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, though.
Kansas City, Missouri?
Yes.
A lot of people from Missouri these
Yes,
days,
sir.
aren't there? Well, tell me something. You read your papers very closely?
Well, I'm afraid I don't read them as closely as I should.
Well, you may wish that you had
I
before we
know.
get through. But just for having the courage to come up here and face our panel, you are $25 richer as of right now. But this is what is going to happen. I will pose some news questions or questions related to news to our panel here. When a panelist gives me the answer to the question, you will have to decide whether that answer is right or wrong. If you are right in your decision, I add $5 more to this sum you already have. If you are wrong in your decision, I take $5 away from whatever you happen to have in front of you. You understand that?
I understand, but the panel looks awfully intelligent.
Oh, don't worry about them. They aren't really. Panel, you will answer questions correctly if you can. If you can't, I suggest that you improvise, rhapsodize, to steal a couple of words from an old play, and see if you can't persuade Mrs. Higgins that you do know the right answer. All set? Let's go to round one. And the first question in round one is this. The biggest U.S. news of the week is still the investigation of General MacArthur's dismissal by the president, right? Throughout the proceedings, there have been constant references to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, I want you to assume that the Joint Chiefs of Staff are meeting over there in the next room somewhere. And they've left their hats on the table. All the hats are on the table, and I want you to look at those hats and tell me which of the hats does not belong in the group and why. And I think that's a good question for Professor Quincy Howe.
You couldn't choose a better one, John, because the hat that doesn't belong there is the hat of the U.S. Marine Corps in the front row on the right. And there was a little time in my life when I was proud to wear one of those hats. And that's why I remember that that's the hat that doesn't belong in the group.
And do you accept that answer, Mrs.
I
Higgins?
agree. I think that's right.
You are now $5 richer, and Mr. Howe is completely right. Well, now, before we leave this matter altogether, do you suppose, Mr. Howe, you could tell me who the other hats would belong to?
I think I can. The one next to the Marine would be either General Bradley or General Collins. I think General Collins. The one in the middle, the other Army hat, would be General Bradley, I believe. And then the one on the right would be General Vandenberg with the, you might say, silver scrambled eggs of the Air Force. And the other would be Admiral Forrest Sherman, the white hat of the United States Navy.
Absolutely right. You shouldn't be a professor. You really should be a newsman. Well, congratulations to all of you. Mrs. Higgins, you are $5 richer, and the panel has proved the wisdom of at least of one of its members, Mr. Howe. So let's go to question number 2, excuse me, in round 1. General Lewis B. Hershey, who is the Director of Selective Service, said this week that by 1953, the United States will have a manpower shortage that might last for 8 years. Can you tell me what he said was the cause of this situation? And that's a lovely question for Miss Anna Lee.
Well, thank you, Mr. Daly, because I believe I know it. I remember reading about it. Yes, that happened in a discussion between General Hershey and Charles E. Wilson. And the point was brought up that owing to the industrial thing that is happening now and the war effort and the mobilization, particularly in the fields of agriculture and farm laborers, that there would be a very bad shortage of manpower for selective service starting next year and continuing through the next 8 years.
I see. And do you accept that answer, Mrs. Higgins?
I agree. That sounds like must be right.
That cost you $5. I'm off. Well, you know, they say it comes and it goes, isn't that true? No, I'm sorry, that's the wrong answer. But now let's see if anybody in our panel can give us the right answer. Mr. Falk?
Well, I think I know the right answer. Back in the 1930s, it seems that money wasn't the only thing we were short on. The stork was short of boy babies, and he didn't deliver enough of them, and now in the 1950s, so Mr. Hershey says, that's what he attributes the trouble to. He puts it all on the stork. We're going to have a manpower
That's absolutely right, Mr. Falk. Congratulations. Fine. Well, I must say that Miss Anna Lee has proven if you just say it with conviction, you can get away with murder.
That's what I thought.
All right, now let's try question 3 in round 1. For our next question, let's turn from the important to the slightly ridiculous. This being the slightly ridiculous. You know what it is, of course.
A pretzel.
A pretzel, fine. Now, this made news last week in Congress. In case you have any doubt, it is, of course, pretzel. And now, how did pretzels make news in Congress last week? Mr. Falk.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it's the Republican congressman, believe it or not, celebrated the pretzel's birthday. Its 90th birthday.
Do you accept that answer,
No,
Mrs.
I don't agree on that.
You don't agree on that one. Well, of course, you will It's 90 years old. It celebrated its 90th anniversary this week, and it was the subject of a speech in Congress by Representative Paul B. Daly of Pennsylvania. Would you have any other information about the pretzel that might be illuminating at this time?
Isn't it un-American?
We haven't quite decided. It's all twisted. There's no question about that.
Well, don't touch me with it if it is.
Well, as a matter of fact, pretzels, I'm sorry to tell you, Mrs. Higgins, pretzels were a symbol of victory in ancient Rome, so I'll give you this
Well,
one.
thank you.
You lost $5, got a pretzel.
May I tell Miss Higgins why I knew that? Because it's the first speech I've heard on pretzels in Congress, or first speech I've heard a congressman make that didn't touch on motherhood.
All right, let's get to question 4 in round 1. Sports is the topic of this next question. The top sports event of this week was, of course, the Kentucky Derby, sometimes known as the Derby. Now, here is the winner, Count Turf. You'll see him up here on the screen. We'll get a good look at it. Now, take a good look at the picture, and then tell us, if you can, why Count Turf will not be able to win next year's Derby. That's a good question for you, Miss Daly.
He will not be able to run next year because he'll be 4 years old, and the Derby is for 3-year-olds.
And do you accept that answer, Mrs. Higgins?
No, I don't think that's right.
The Kentucky Derby is for 3-year-olds only. Obviously, a horse cannot win twice in a row. I'm off.
That's right.
All right, now.
They're tricking you, Miss Higgins. We
Let's
follow.
go to question number 5 in round 1, and you can recoup some of your losses, okay?
all right.
Our next question concerns the object that was passed down the panel at the start of the show. You'll remember seeing our distinguished panel members looking at it as they were introduced. What you saw, panelists, was a replica of the object. But right now, we're going to show you we're going to show the original to our home audience. Now, how did the actual object, of which this was a replica, represented by what you saw, make nationwide news during the past week or so? I think it's a good question for Quincy Howe.
It's a wonderful question for me, if only the answer were equally clear. But I would say that the answer on that is that it was in the shape of a baseball, and it was a jeweler's article which was issued celebrating the opening of the baseball season in the state of Texas, in the Texas League.
And do you accept that answer, Mrs. Higgins?
Yes? Well,
I'm awful sorry. It's going to cost you another
everyone lies so convincingly.
Correct answer to that one.
Rita Hayworth's coat of arms?
Oh, no, not Rita Hayworth's coat of arms. I'm surprised at you ladies.
I thought as a matter of fact, I thought I read about it in the gossip columns recently, in the society columns. Didn't it figure in an apartment penthouse apartment in Park Avenue?
No, I'm sorry. We better leave that right where it is, too, up in Park Avenue. This was a medal with 6 stars conferred upon Mrs. Douglas MacArthur by the DAR of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Don't you remember? They gave her 6 stars. It was at the top of the reproduction that you saw. We showed you the original sketch of the medal, which was designed and made by the DAR by the B.H. Stice Jewelry Company down in Nashville, Tennessee, and that was written there, you see. We thought that would give you an idea. The object we showed, of course, was the sketch with the lettering blacked out. I'm awfully sorry, panel.
I didn't look at it very carefully.
Well, I feel even sorry about you, Mrs. Higgins. You didn't do absolutely brilliantly, but you did fairly well, so don't feel bad about it.
Your panel's just too good.
Thanks very much for being our guest on It's News Tonight. All right, panel, let's get on to round 2, and may we have the second of the representatives for John Q. Public. Will you sit down, please?
How do you do?
Corporal James Klonosky, is that right?
Klonosky, sir.
Klonosky, I didn't have the emphasis. Well, come in a bit, because there's nothing around you that'll bite you except me, and I don't have good teeth. All right, now suppose you tell us first of all where you came from.
I'm out at Fort Slocum, New York, at the Armed Forces Information School right now, sir, in a 6-week course.
Fine, but where do you call home?
Virginia, Minnesota, sir.
Virginia, Minnesota. Well, that ought to confuse the panel, wouldn't it? Well, now, let's see. We've got to give you your original $25 for having the courage to come up here and face our friend. And you know the rules now because you saw us play. We won't have to go through those again. So let's get right down to the first question in round 2. Panel, you're going to witness a little scene. We want you to tell us how this became news this week. So watch our scene. All right. Now, how did such an event become news? And that's a good question for you, Miss Dalrymple.
That was a story about a diplomat at the Waldorf during the time that MacArthur was there. He had to catch a train, and he had his trunk outside on the sidewalk, and he couldn't find anybody, not a bellboy or a porter or anyone, to help him put it into a taxi, so he had to pick it up and put it in himself. And he made a very big complaint to the hotel about it.
And do you accept that answer, Sergeant?
No, I can't go along with it, sir.
That means you're $5 richer, Sergeant. Very good. That one was manufactured out of whole cloth. And by the way, I forgot to tell everybody that Mrs. Higgins didn't do too badly because she still left us winning $15. We hope you do better, Sergeant. All right, now, does anybody in the panel know the right answer, please? Mr. Falk.
That had to do with, she's right about it. It was diplomats that didn't leave it in front of the Waldorf. The AFL left it sitting on docks down here and told the Russians to load it themselves if they wanted it loaded.
That's absolutely right. Incidentally, some of their freight was still left on the dock, and many of those returning Russians were shipping washing machines, refrigerators, and television sets, which would tend to prove that they had been on a lot of television programs while they were together. All right, let's get to the second question in round 2. Take a look at this picture, which will come up on our screen. You see it? Now, the sergeant in it made national news. What's the reason he's in the news? And that's yours, Mr. Falk.
Oh. Well, that sergeant is the sergeant that came in on, was flown back especially by the American Airways. After he'd complained he's supposed to get a leave to come back to the United States. They'd left him out on it, and his folks pulled some kind of strings in Washington, or at least his mother wrote a pathetic letter. And next thing you knew, they clapped him on this airship, and back home he came, battle stars and all.
And do you accept that answer, Sergeant?
No, I don't.
$5 richer for the guard. Well, Mr. Falk, you couldn't be wronger, as they say. Does anybody in the panel have the right answer? This is a real tough one. Mr. Falk couldn't have been wronger. Now, there's the clue.
Something about Corrigan, wrong way Corrigan?
No. That is Sergeant Ernest R. Cuomo. Now, what did he do, Miss Lee?
He just won the Congressional Medal of Honor.
That's right. He is the only living veteran of the Korean War to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. And this picture was taken in San Francisco when he was en route to get his Medal of Honor. And a very proud achievement for him, too, I must say. So we get to question 3 in round 2. What are you giggling about? You're doing fine.
$10 richer.
I think that corporal's in intelligence.
All right, now, take a look at this. I'll put it up here where you can get a reasonably good look at it. Now, that's, of course, a baseball, right? But it's a very special baseball, which made headlines in all the sports pages because of a game May 1st in Comiskey Park between the New York Yankees and the Chicago White Sox. How did this particular baseball, the one I have right here in front of me, make sporting headlines? Mr. Howe.
That made sporting headlines because Joe DiMaggio hit that ball into the center field stands for the longest home run ever hit in the Chicago White Sox Comiskey Park, right near my own University of Illinois.
And do you accept that answer,
No,
Sergeant?
sir, I do not.
$5 fall for the sergeant. I never heard anything said with more conviction, but that isn't right. Now, is there anybody on the panel who can give us the right answer? Miss Lee.
Wasn't it the ball that was given to Arthur MacArthur when he watched his first baseball?
The ball that was given to Arthur MacArthur
Yes.
watching it? No.
Oh.
They wouldn't have it up here.
Anybody else got any ideas? No ideas. Well, now, this is the actual baseball that Mickey Mantle, the sensational new outfielder of the New York Yankees, hit into the stands for his first Major League home run. That was done May 1st at Comiskey Park. And you know, Mickey Mantle thinks so much of this here baseball, he won't trust anyone but himself to get it back. So, come on out, Mickey, and get back your famous baseball. Well, Mickey, it's grand to see you here on the program. Looks like you have a lot of your rooters right out here in our audience. Before you leave us, would you please tell me how you were able to get that baseball back from the fan that must have grabbed it when you knocked it out into the stand?
Well, when I hit the ball in Chicago, you know, the visiting team's bullpen is in center field. And the ball hit right over the bullpen in the bleachers there. And the guys in the bullpen finally talked the guy that got it out of it. They had to give him 3 balls for it.
They must have been real fast talkers. Well, thanks very much, Mickey, for coming up to see us. All right. Question 4 in round 2. I'm going to read you a statement about the current news story, and I want you to tell me what particular event this sentence refers to. The statement: Mr. Costello is looking forward to May 30th in the hope that he will be able to reestablish his leadership. I repeat, to what particular event does that statement refer, Mr. Falk?
Well, as a matter of fact, that statement was made in jest on the golf course down in Florida where Mr. Costello was playing a game. It wasn't meant to be overheard by a reporter. He got hold of it and reported. It seemed that they were teasing him. They said, well, last time you had a bigger audience in Milton Borough by just having your hands and a handkerchief in view. And he uses his whole carcass. And Costello said, well, I'll get back in there, and next time I'll throw my whole body into the deal.
Fine. And do you accept that answer, Sergeant?
I'll go along with it this time.
That's going to cost you $5. Sorry, anybody get the right answer?
Just sell this panel short every time you're actually saying, soldier.
Oh, I told you. On May 30th, elections will be held in Ireland, and nobody knew it. John A. Costello, the Prime Minister, hopes to gain sufficient majority so he can form another government. It's as simple as that. All right, question 5, round 2. General Matthew Ridgway and General James Van Fleet, the 2 key figures in the Far Eastern military operations, are practically trademarked by the weapons they carry in the field. Over here we have a number of weapons where you'll be able to see them. Can you pick out the ones identified with Generals Ridgway and Van Fleet? And I think this is a good question for Miss Anna Lee. First of all, will you identify which of those weapons is identified with General Ridgway?
With General Ridgway, it certainly wouldn't be the... Oh, yes, it would. It might. The long, butcher-looking thing.
All right, now General Van Fleet.
The 2 little things on top.
All right, do you accept that
No,
answer,
sir,
Sergeant?
that's
$5 for the Sergeant. Those are the wrong answers. We'll give you the right one. The ivory-handled automatic. The ivory-handled automatic, which is now being touched, General Van Fleet, and the 2 hand grenades, which are, of course, identified with General Ridgway. And, Sergeant, you did very well indeed.
Thank
You
you.
leave us with a sum of $40. Thanks for being our guest on It's News to Me. All right, our next feature, round 3 panel, is of a different kind. It's a special feature of It's News to Me, which we call Eyewitness. Each week we bring before our cameras an individual who saw an actual famous news story of the past. He saw what happened, and it's up to you, the members of the panel, to find out what that news story was by cross-examining our witness for a total of just 3 minutes. Panel, you may ask our eyewitness questions, any eyewitness questions you want. They'll be answered yes or no, and you ask your questions in turn for periods of 15 seconds. When the bell rings like this, that means your turn's up and it passes on to the next. We'll keep going that way for 3 minutes. You all ready? Fine. For every minute that you use up in this particular questioning, we give to our guest, who is going to be here in a minute, $20. You all ready? All right. Now, here's tonight's eyewitness, Mr. James Bronson. Will you come in, sir? Very good to see you, Mr. Bronson. Over to you now. All right, now, Mr. Bronson, what is the month and day, the month and day of your news story?
The 22nd of September.
Fine, don't say any more. For the home audience, here is the event which Mr. Bronson was a part of. An event which made the front pages of the nation's papers. Okay, panel, you have the date. All ready for the questioning? John Corp, start now.
Did it happen in America?
Yes.
Did it happen in the United States?
Yes.
It happened east side of the Mississippi River.
Yes.
Did it happen in New York?
No.
Was it theatrical?
No.
Was it political?
No.
Miss Dalrymple.
Was it sports?
Yes.
Was it a prize fight?
Yes.
Was it a world championship match?
Yes.
Was it in the last 5 years?
No.
Was it in the last 15 years?
All right, Miss Lee.
Did it happen in Chicago?
Yes.
Was it, it was a boxing match?
That's
Yes.
right.
Did it happen in the 30s?
In the 30s? No.
In the 20s?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Quincy
Tunney
Howe.
and Dempsey in Chicago.
I didn't quite get that.
Tunney Dempsey heavyweight championship fight in Chicago.
You're quite
the
right.
long count.
That's absolutely right. Quincy, can you tell us one other thing? What distinguished this fight and made it so very important?
The long
The long
count.
count.
The long count. That's absolutely right. Now, Mr. Bronson, would you tell us what part you played in this fight?
I was the chief advisor to Gene Tunney.
The chief advisor to
That's
Gene
right.
Tunney. Well, for heaven's
I
sake.
didn't take a punch.
You didn't. Well, that's the way to do these fights. But you mean you were actually in his corner?
Oh, yes.
Well, now, what about that long count? Did you have any part to play in that?
Well, the part I played in that, when Tunney got hit, Tunney went to the floor, and Tunney looked over to me to find out what had happened before he kind of came back, and I waved him on the floor. I kept him on the floor for the long count.
Because you saw that Mr. Dempsey had not gone to his corner.
That's right.
You see Mr. Dempsey since then?
I didn't speak to Dempsey for 31 years.
Probably just as well, Mr. Bronson.
Surprising thing, but we started speaking 2 years ago.
Oh, fine. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're all back friends again.
Tunney and Dempsey are very, very good friends because we were two marvelous customers for each other.
Yeah, and they're two fine men. I'm glad. And thanks for being with us, Mr. Bronson, on It's News to Me. Good night, sir. All right, panel, now we'll go into round 4, and we'll have to take it as far as we can for the time it allows. We're going to turn back to this round to some great news events of the past. Examine the visual clues that we give you up on the screen, which you are all familiar with now, and tell me the news story it refers to. All right, let's start with the first. All right, that's July, as you can see, 1938. Now, what famous news story do those clues recall to you?
Can we ask questions?
No, you can't ask any questions.
Who wants it?
Well, let me see. I think perhaps we better give that one to Mr. Falk.
I think so. He come from Texas. That's old wrong way car.
Yeah.
That's wrong way, Corrigan. All right, now we've changed the order a bit. Now, will you please tell me your name?
Mrs. George Fraser.
And where do you come from,
New
Mrs. Fraser?
Rochelle, New York.
New Rochelle, New York. And here are your original $25. Now,
I want to tell you I'm more scared than I was when I became a grandmother.
Well, don't worry about it. Now, you heard this play, you saw the picture, and you've heard the answer. Mr. Falcon says that was a picture of Douglas Wrong-Way Corrigan. Do you agree with that answer?
No.
You don't? Oh, I'm sorry, that's going to cost you $5. That was the right answer. All right? Now, let's try another one, which I don't believe you'll find too difficult. Here is the picture, February 1937. And let's give that one to Mr. Howe.
That's a 9 and a 15, February 37. That would be reference to the gold standard in the country of Bulgaria. They gave you 15 of their units of currency, dinars, for 9 on the new currency basis in February of 37.
Do you accept that answer, Mrs. Fraser?
I do.
You do? Shouldn't have. That's going to cost you another $5. That's the wrong answer. That was President Roosevelt's proposal to enlarge the U.S. Supreme Court from 9 to 15 judges. All right, let's get on to the next one. There is our picture, the next one, the third problem, and it's May 1931. We'll give that to Miss Lee. May 1931. Look at your clues.
That's not Al Smith, no.
We can't give you any help, but you must give us an answer. What do you say, Miss Lee?
Yes, I think that's Al Smith.
That would mean it had to do with what?
It had to do with the election, the forthcoming election in 1932, and that was when Al Smith declared that Herbert Hoover would only poll 102 electoral votes in the forthcoming election.
And I
remember that.
You accept that answer, Mrs. Fraser? You shouldn't have done it. $5. You shouldn't have done it. That was the year they opened the Empire State Building in New York. That was why Al Smith was there. It's the world's tallest structure. All right, now let's go to one more question. Here's the fourth in this series, our round 4. There are your clues. We'll give this one to Miss Dalrymple. What do you see, Miss Dalrymple?
It looks like the Golden Gate Bridge.
The date on that, by the way, is June 1945. Yes.
50. The beginning of the United Nations with 50 nations in San Francisco.
And do you accept that answer, Mrs. Fraser? You got $5 back. That is absolutely right. That was the inaugurating convention of the United Nations and the signing of its charter. All right, there is one more in round 4. Let's see, the last one in this series, and there are the clues. The date is June 1939. Mr. Falk.
That is when the King and Queen of England visited the United States, and Ms. Roosevelt served them hot dogs and beer up there in Hyde Park.
And do you accept that, Mr. Fraser? You accept that one? You got another $5 back. Congratulations. That was exactly the right answer. The visit of the King and Queen of England to the Roosevelt home in Hyde Park, New York, where, as Mr. Falk says, they served hot dogs as the feature of the menu. I'm afraid we haven't any time to go into that delightful event, but we can say that Mrs. Fraser didn't do too badly. She leaves us with $20. We hope you're not scared anymore, and that you thought that being a grandmother was much tougher than this one.
It certainly was.
Well, thanks for being our guest on It's News to Me. Good night, ma'am. Well, you can just see all go on going back to your seat. Sure. Thanks very much. Now, in this last category panel, as a matter of fact, we're going to give you a slight bit of a rest. What we're going to do here in this new department, which we call How Do You Rate, we're going to give the folks at home a chance to see what they know about the news. We've reserved it just for you folks who are viewing at home. Each week on It's News to Me, we're going to give our home viewers a chance to check their own personal news ratings. Tonight, the topic is wives of men in the news. We want you to look at each of 5 women, jot down the names of their newsworthy husbands. You got that straight now. You're going to look at each of 5 women, jot down the names of their newsworthy husbands. Give yourself 20 points for each correct answer. All right, here is the first. Her husband calls her Jean, but who is her husband? Second, her maiden name is Lucille Eikens. 20 points for the name of her spouse. Third, Jenny Lee is the name she uses in politics. Who is her politician husband? Fourth, Mamie Dowd is at home while hubby is overseas. Who is she? And last of all, can we get the last picture on the screen? Well, I'm afraid we can't get that picture on. We've had a little trouble, so we'll just stick with that 4, and you can count 25 for each one of them. Now, let's run down the names. Panel, who has all of them? Miss Lee.
General MacArthur, that was Mrs. MacArthur, Mr. Robert Vogler, Mr. Nye Bevan, and, of course, General Eisenhower.
That's right. So score yourself 25 on each of them. If you had them all right, you were 100% correct. How do you rate on tonight's news test? You'll have a chance to equal or better your score the next time we broadcast It's News to Me. And with this, we wind up proceedings for this trial session of It's News to Me. We hope the program has proved enjoyable and that at the same time it stimulated your interest in the news of the day. Until the next time we meet, this is John Daly saying good night.
And good night to our panel, John Falk, Jean Dalrymple, Anna Lee, and Quincy Howe. It's News to Me has been presented by CBS in association with Mark Goodson and Bill Codman, directed by Jerome Schnurr.